Yeah, welcome back to Sunday Supplement and welcome back to Miguel Delaney, Charlotte Dunker and Jonathan Liu. Let's go to the back page of The Sun and what looks like a pretty surprising story, Charlotte. Back in the frame, legend David De Gea is an option for Ruben Amorim. Did you see this one coming?
No. I think this morning when we were talking about it before we came on air and someone suggested it, I was like, pardon? And it seems like the obvious link was that he was back at Old Trafford last Saturday playing a friendly, and Manchester United have remembered that actually he's an all right shot stopper, and maybe he is a better shot stopper than the guy that they have there at the moment. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. Could I see it happening? I mean, it doesn't seem very likely at the moment. Whenever you talk to Manchester United about the goalkeeper position at the moment, they're saying it's not a priority. But the main reason it's not a priority is because Onana's still there. Onana's obviously had a lot of interest this summer, particularly from Saudi, but he and his camp are saying he's determined to stay at Manchester United. Amorim's quotes in his press conference on Friday didn't give him any assurances that he's necessarily going to be the first choice goalkeeper. But then if you look at who Manchester United have in their goalkeeping department, if he's not going to be the first choice, then they do need to bring someone else in, because Bayinda, when he's played, hasn't really filled anyone with much confidence. Tom Heaton's a great leadership guy to have around the club. Is he going to be Manchester United's first choice goalkeeper as they aim to get back on track? No. There's been the obvious links to Donnarumma. I think De Gea being thrown in there is a bit of a wild card. If we go back to obviously when he left, I think a lot of Manchester United fans, not that they weren't disappointed to see him leave, but I think there was a feeling that maybe it'd come to the end of the time. I think there was a bit of disappointment with how it ended, in terms of he obviously didn't get the goodbye that people were expecting. He was sort of pushed out the back door a bit. You can see on the back page there, he was presented with that frame last week because he never got that big goodbye after, and he'd been at the club for so long. But is he the solution for them in net? I'd argue not. It seems that they'd be going backwards a bit.
Alan Nixon is the reporter who's done this article, and he says that the Manchester United have been tipped off that he's got a clause in his deal allowing him to leave for a relatively small sum. The goalkeeping department generally, you're either brilliant at shot stopping or brilliant with your feet. How difficult is it to find both at the moment?
It is, and I think certainly the game went through a phase about maybe a decade ago where there was a real dearth of top quality keepers because of this splintering of the role into what you might call pure shot stoppers and players who could play with their feet, and there were very few who could do both. Then obviously you get guys like Edison and Alisson who became world class, who lit up the Premier League for years. And I think these days that divide is less valid. I mean, we might talk about Donnarumma later. There's this idea that Donnarumma can play with his feet. He's much better with his feet than most goalkeepers of 10 years ago. But because he's also a great shot stopper, I think he gets that's partly why he's not in Luis Enrique's plans at PSG. And I think when United moved on from De Gea, they were it was almost moving on from that model of goalkeeper as well. Onana was seen to be a lot better with his feet. It's certainly more conducive to the sort of the possession style, playing out from the back style that they wanted. So going back to him, unless it's just as a number two, or somebody to bring through the young keepers, although he wouldn't be on number two wages, but that makes sense. But if they're going back to the whole De Gea goalkeeping model, I think that suggests a bigger shift.
But then if they brought him back in as a number, surely they're only going to bring him back in if Onana leaves. If Onana leaves, De Gea is not going to be a first choice goalkeeper. So who is? Out of those three that we just mentioned, none of them, arguably. Onana is probably the best at for what Manchester United want to do under Amorim and the style they want to play. Onana is the best suited for that. Is he the best goalkeeper in the league? Of course he's not. But out of that pool that we've just mentioned, he's probably best suited to what Amorim wants to do right now.
I mean, well, on that as well, Amorim, OK, he's not as dogmatic as Ten Hag was about this, and this is one of the reasons why Onana's at the club, because United are so committed briefly to Ten Hag's approach. But, De Gea, we did see him try to play this approach with Spain, say, in the 2018 World Cup. I remember seeing it at the time. You could almost see the kind of, not quite the panic, but it was very clear that Piqué and Sergio Ramos and staff didn't really trust De Gea with his feet in the way that, they had been used to with Victor Valdez or or even Iker Casillas before that. So, and okay, again, Amorim isn't as pronounced in this approach, but it's part of the modern game now, and that's why it's difficult to see him being much more than a kind of an alternative.
Yeah, I'm sure all eyes will be not only on the goalkeepers, but everything at Old Trafford this afternoon, including Arsenal's title challenge. And in the Sunday Express, I think we've seen this headline before, haven't we? Gonna be our year. Tougher Timbers title talk. Miguel, are they equipped to take that final step instead of being thereabouts to being there?
I think so. I think they're really... I mean, look, they've been brilliant for 3 years. I know that 3 years has seen a lot of debate about Arteta, whether he's a winner in all this, whether he's a good manager, but one that can't get them quite over the line. I think they've been a little bit unfortunate over that period. I mean, they got 89 points in 22-23. Arteta is the only manager in the Premier League history to have had an 89-point season and not also won the league at some other point. But I think that speaks to how difficult it was. They were up against City, and all that project is at its most imperious. Last season, I think you could say, was the big opportunity because City obviously had their crisis. But from speaking to people at Arsenal, I think they do see what happened last season as explainable. There were some issues in the squad they didn't resolve. But most of all, they suddenly had these injury clusters that they didn't have in the previous 2 seasons. And as Arsenal put it, for all the debate about kind of, you know, the style and the approach and whether they're aggressive, whether they became a set-piece team, if you look, say, I mean, they scored, 91 goals in 23-24 when they had all of their best players available. So the issue is really, it wasn't their top level, which is good. We've seen that, say, when they destroyed City last season 5-1, in some big performances over the past. Like, again, Arteta was mocked for the comments about how they were the best team in Europe after the Paris Saint-Germain game. But he genuinely feels that their top level is title level. The issue is sustaining it. And what they've done this summer is they've got a lot of depth. They've solved issues. So suddenly, they're not going to be as reliant, say, on Odegaard or Saka. I think they will use Havertz a lot still because Arteta loves the way he gets their pressing approach. But now they've got that alternative in Gyökeres. The one question, I suppose, is, because I think they're at that level, is whether they've solved the issues that they had for last season, but now whether the dial has moved again, because, you know, as even speaking to people within Arsenal, the mood in the Premier League is that Liverpool have just gone out and did what no one actually expected in the market. They've signed game changers, especially if they get Isak, and that has possibly changed things. And then, of course, I mean, we'll get on to this, but the other great uncertainty, which is what City will do, well, they looked very strong yesterday.
I don't think it's Arsenal's top level that's necessarily in question, because like Miguel said, we all know what they can do. It's being one of those teams that consistently grind out results, even when they've not been playing that well, even when everything's gone against them. You've lost some of your best players to injury, who can step up and fill that void. And I think the signings that they've made this summer, if you look at each of the positions where they have upgraded in each of those positions. So like you said, they're not reliant on the same 11 each week, and that should be the difference to maybe help them, because they dropped a lot of vital points last season at times where they should have been able to get over the line, even if they were playing at 75%, which is what champions do. If you look at Liverpool towards the back end of last season, they actually didn't play that great, but they were still winning. And I think that could be the difference we see with Arsenal this season.
Jonathan, everyone thinks Arsenal will win. Not today. That's according to Ruben Amorim. Is he right to have that confidence? That's in the Sunday Mirror.
Yeah, I think Arsenal probably slight favourites. I mean, they don't have a great record at Old Trafford, if I remember rightly. And I think, you know, there are always so many unknowns in the first weekend of the season in terms of how teams are going to line up, how their styles are going to match up, how quickly new signings are going to gel, new systems. I have to say, I do find this framing of Arsenal's season, this kind of now or never. It's now or never for Arteta. Everything's on this season. I do find it quite strange. I mean, not surprising, to be honest, because it does, I think, play into this narrative, I think, that comes from a lot of Arsenal fans and I think from the media as well, of this kind of fatalism that Arsenal are basically set up to fail every season, which is not to say that they should be that they should be happy with finishing second 3 seasons in a row, but it's not like, you know, they have a squad that's over the hill. It's, you know, it's not like they have a coach that is losing his touch. You know, it doesn't. I think it's a paradox in sport that the best way of getting the outcome that you want is not to fixate on the outcome. And I think for Arsenal this season, you know, this whole framing of now or never is actually going to be counterproductive.
I do agree with that, but I do think there is also this, and this is what you're saying about being counterproductive. There is an element with teams who have been together, no matter their age, but for quite a while, and they're always just on the brink of getting there, and they don't get there. Suddenly, when you face that bit of difficulty, that's when things can start to tailspin. There's two relatively recent examples in the Premier League. One was Rafa Benitez's Liverpool. In 08-09, in that run-in, they were absolutely brilliant. They were up against, Ferguson's United. And then the next season, it was a total collapse. And Rafa was gone by the end of the season. Another similar one, I suppose, is Spurs, actually. For 3 years, they were superb. Similar to some of the stuff that actually Arteta's been coming out with the last few days. Their points total, say, over 2 years at Spurs in 16-17 and 17-18 was the best in England. It was 15-16 and 16-17. It was just, they couldn't get over the line.
But Spurs, that Spurs team ended up getting broken up and picked off, and Liverpool lost Alonso. That the defence was ageing. It needed a bit of a rebuild. This Arsenal team, it's still a young team. They can keep the core of this squad together for another 2 or 3 years.
And to be fair, one thing that should be pointed out there, they've done really well this summer in terms of contracts, because there was a bit of anxiety this in the last year about how that was building and the questions about, because now you have to commit to bigger wages because they're there. But it just, I suppose, allied to the point, I think there has been this emotion around Arsenal, both outside and some of the debate they provoke, and within the club or within the stadium, because obviously they're feeling the angst of now going, 21 years, or 20, it's going to be 22 years at least, without a title, I think, which is the longest they've ever been, ever since they won their first title. And then as that builds up, it does become this power all of its own.